Paul Gascoigne's downfall wasn't just your typical story of alcoholism, it was so much worse. His drinking didn't just wreck his career, it tore apart his mental health and dragged him into a spiral of trouble, leading to crimes that shocked everyone. It wasn't just another case of a talented player losing his way. It was a tragic, messy, and heartbreaking collapse. Paul's battle with alcoholism wasn't just a rough patch. It was a relentless struggle that took over his life. His first serious attempt at getting help came in October 1998, when he hit rock bottom after downing an unbelievable 32 shots of whiskey in one session. That left him in such bad shape that his then manager, Brian Robson, had him admitted to the Priory Hospital while he was still unconscious. But even then, Gascoigne resisted the help he so badly needed. He insisted on leaving just 2 weeks into the recommended 28-day stay. Over time, his visits to the Priory became less frequent, and, before long, he was back to drinking again. By 2001, Everton chairman Bill Kenwright saw that Paul was in deep trouble and stepped in, contacting his therapist to arrange more treatment. This time, Paul was sent to a clinic in Cottonwood, Arizona, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It was a crucial moment, shedding light on the deeper mental health issues fueling his addiction. Despite this, the cycle of self-destruction continued. He returned to the clinic in 2003 after struggling in China, and again in 2004 after he retired from football. No matter how many times he tried to get better, he kept slipping back into old habits. Then came 2008, a year that made it painfully clear just how much Paul was spiraling out of control. In February, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act after an incident at a hotel in Newcastle, where authorities feared he might harm himself. Just a few months later, in June, he was sectioned again. Then, in September, things took a darker turn. He overdosed on alcohol and drugs in what appeared to be a suicide attempt. It was heartbreaking to watch, but sadly, it wasn't the end of his troubles. By 2010, Paul's run-ins with the law were becoming alarmingly frequent. In February, he was arrested for causing a disturbance outside a takeaway. A month later, he was charged with drunk driving, driving without a license, and driving without insurance. But his most bizarre moment that year came in July when he showed up at the police standoff with fugitive Raoul Moat, claiming to be Moat's brother. He had brought beer, chicken, a fishing rod, a Newcastle shirt and a dressing gown, convinced that he could calm the situation. Of course, he wasn't allowed anywhere near Moat. Later, he sued The Sun, claiming their coverage of the incident had interfered with his recovery. His problems with alcohol only got worse from there. In October 2010, he was arrested for drunk driving again, this time found to be more than 4 times over the legal limit. As if that wasn't bad enough, the very next day he was arrested again, this time for possession of cocaine. He was supposed to appear in court in November for the drunk driving charge, but instead checked himself into rehab. The court gave him an 8-week suspended sentence, but it did little to change his path. By 2013, Paul's longtime agent Terry Baker publicly admitted that things were getting desperate. Speaking on BBC Radio 5 Live, Baker confessed that Paul's life was constantly in danger because of his drinking and that he wasn't sure anyone could save him anymore. That year, he was placed in intensive care at an Arizona rehab facility after suffering severe withdrawal symptoms. Even financial support from former cricketer Ronnie Irani and broadcaster Chris Evans couldn't turn things around. Just months later, in July, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting a railway security guard while drunk. He pleaded guilty, was fined £1,000 and ordered to pay compensation. Despite repeated attempts at recovery, his battle with addiction dragged on. In January 2014, he entered rehab for the 7th time, spending £6,000 a month on treatment in Southampton. But that August, he was hospitalised again after another alcohol-related incident. Then, in October, police were called to his home after he had been on a heavy drinking binge. The next day, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act and taken to a hospital for detox. The pattern was undeniable. Paul was stuck in a loop he couldn't break free from. His troubles weren't just with alcohol. In October 2015, he was fined and hit with a restraining order for harassing an ex-girlfriend and assaulting a photographer. The following year, he was fined £1,000 for making a racist joke and abusing his own bodyguard. That December, he was hospitalised yet again. This time, after being kicked down a flight of stairs in a London hotel, leaving him with head injuries and broken teeth. His attacker was sentenced to 23 weeks in jail, but that did nothing to change Paul's downward spiral. By early 2017, Paul was making yet another effort to get sober, checking into rehab once more. But in August 2018, he was back in trouble. Arrested at Durham railway station for allegedly sexually assaulting a woman on a train. The case went to trial in 2019, where he was ultimately cleared. He claimed that he had only kissed the woman to boost her confidence after calling her a fat lass, insisting there was no sexual intent. But none of this takes away from his career, which was full of brilliance and incredible records. Paul's football journey started with a bang when he captained Newcastle United's youth team to victory in the 1984-85 FA Youth Cup, scoring twice in a 4-1 win over Watford. After an underwhelming first leg, he led the team to a dominant performance in the second, catching the eye of manager Jack Charlton. Though Charlton promised him a first-team spot the next day, he didn't make the lineup. However, Paul finally made his debut on April 13, 1985, coming on as a substitute in a 1-0 win over QPR. At 18, he signed a £120 a week contract with Newcastle, though Charlton, knowing Paul's generous nature, ensured that half of his wages were put aside for him to collect later. With Willie McFall taking over as manager in 1985, Paul became a regular starter, filling the void left by Chris Waddle's departure. He quickly made an impact, scoring his first goal in a 3-0 win against Oxford United and finishing the season with 9 goals. By 1988, his talent was undeniable. Jackie Milburn even called him the best player in the world. But Newcastle's instability made it impossible to keep him. After promising Alex Ferguson he'd sign for Manchester United, Paul shocked everyone by joining Tottenham Hotspur instead for a British record fee of £2.2 million. In his first season at Spurs, he helped the team finish 6th, and by 1990 they climbed to 3rd. He even scored 4 goals in a single match against Hartlepool in the League Cup. That year, he won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year award, saying, "I haven't won anything yet, but the World Cup put England on the map." His best season at Spurs came in 1991, as he guided them to the FA Cup final, scoring a stunning free kick against Arsenal in the semi-final. But just as he was about to seal a move to Lazio for £8.5 million, disaster struck in the final against Nottingham Forest. A reckless challenge ruptured his cruciate ligaments, and he missed the entire following season. His injury and off-field incidents, including a nightclub mishap, delayed his transfer, and when it finally happened, Lazio paid £5.5 million instead. Paul's time in Italy was a mix of brilliance and controversy. He made an instant impact, scoring a late equaliser in the Rome derby, but struggled with injuries, fitness issues, and the Italian press. His cheeky nature didn't help either. He once greeted Lazio's owner by commenting on his daughter's big breasts. By 1994, after breaking his leg in training, he and Lazio parted ways. That's when Rangers came calling. Walter Smith flew to Paul's home in Rome and simply asked if he'd join. Paul's response: "Aye, all right." And just like that, he was in Scotland, signing for a club record £4.3 million. He became an instant hero, scoring a stunning solo goal in the Old Firm derby and later bagging a hat-trick against Aberdeen to secure the league title. Rangers went on to win the Scottish Cup as well, with Paul playing a starring role. His performances earned him both PFA Scotland and SFWA Player of the Year awards. The next season, Rangers won the league again, with Paul scoring 2 more hat-tricks. But concerns over his drinking started to surface. He still had his moments of brilliance, but trouble wasn't far behind. His antics included defecating in Gennaro Gattuso's sock and miming playing the flute in an Old Firm game, which led to a £20,000 fine and a death threat from the IRA. By 1998, his form dipped and Rangers decided to move him on. Middlesbrough, managed by Brian Robson, signed him for £3.45 million, and he made his debut in the League Cup final. Though Boro secured promotion to the Premier League, Paul's struggles with mental health and alcohol worsened. A few bright moments aside, his career was on a downward spiral. He broke his arm in a reckless challenge, got banned, and eventually left for Everton in 2000 under Walter Smith. At Everton, glimpses of his old magic remained, but injuries and personal demons kept him from making a real impact. After a brief spell at Burnley and an unsuccessful trial in China, he returned to England, where Wolves and Boston United both gave him short-lived chances. By 2004, his playing days were all but over, and though he had ambitions to coach, it never truly materialised. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.